the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we are flying across the Atlantic to Lyon to speak with astrologer and poet Azur. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I love your poetry. I love what you're up to in the world of astrology. And as far as I know, you're one of the few French astrologers active online who works with traditional astrology. Is that real?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm blushing right now internally very much. I am not sure I could really do a proper survey of what's going on the French-speaking side, because I've mostly been involved in, studying in English and mostly collaborating with English speakers.
Okay.
But we're not a lot practicing with more ancient traditions of astrology, for sure. When I started, I actually started a blog because I couldn't find much of anything in French. So I feel like it's kind of developing, but perhaps more in Quebec than in France, honestly.
So if it's there, it's underground.
Sort of. I mean, I have a few colleagues that I discuss this with, French speakers, but not necessarily people who currently have a website up or stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also a tradition of astrology from the Renaissance period that ran through France that kind of became sort of like the Jean-Baptiste Morin, like the last great French Renaissance astrologer. He sort of set the cap on that entire time period. Do you ever work with his ideas?
I haven't had a chance to explore yet. It's honestly so exciting how much I have yet to discover and study.
Yeah. No, it took me a long time to get to Morin as well. That was sort of one of those, I was stuck in Germany for a very long time. And it's like, I'll get to that French guy later.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. That's really one of the things I love the most about astrology. It's infinite learning ahead, which is just great.
Okay, so let's go back to your beginning. What was the first astrology book that you read?
That was Hellenistic Astrology, the Study of Fate and Fortune by Chris Brennan. So I had an interest in astrology for years, but I wasn't raised in an environment that was conducive to taking it seriously. So I first learned, a lot of bits and pieces through browsing the internet, Twitter and that sort of thing, and then getting into blog posts and podcasts. And gradually it became obvious to me that this wasn't merely confirmation bias or an elaborate personality test with a cosmic flavor. And I began to have this kind of deep hunger to learn more, to dive deeper, to really immerse myself in studying. And I decided to go with Chris Brennan's book because I really love the astrology podcast. Such a great learning resource. And I like the idea of starting with really foundational basics.
Wow. Yeah. So you were getting it from the internet first and then landed on that text, which was sort of it's like jumping from in a resort, you're kind of circling around and you're like, I'm just going to jump in the deep end. Just like that. Plunge, take a cannonball, just boom, big splash. Here we go.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, yeah, I never thought of it like that, but that's also such a nice image for it. I really wanted to have a sturdy foundation. I think Brennan's approach, which is very, methodical, rigorous, was perfect for where I was at that point in time. But I will confess, when I started to read it, I was like, oh, I'm going to skip to the technique right now. I can't go through the whole history part. So I came back to it later, obviously, read it cover to cover afterwards. But at first I was like, no, I'm hungry for the technique right now. I want to know how these things work and how to use it.
Yeah, you find that a lot that people want to know techniques and history of astrology is kind of as and when, maybe it's the spice on top of the dish, but it's not really something, I find it few and far between that people are just running into the history. But at some point you do get bit and you're like, I need to know every single historical astrologer who ever lived and everything they ever thought,
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so here's the big question. If you were going to be stuck on a deserted island and you could only take 3 astrology books with you, what would they be?
So I'm going to try to ignore all of the questions that come up for me with this question. Like, where is the desert island? Am I alone? Is there electricity and internet and stuff like that? I'm going to assume that I still have the possibility of a social life with incarnate human beings and that I still have access to my software of choice.
As opposed to a social life with disincarnate humans?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, perhaps I would make different choices then. I don't know.
I want that podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because unfortunately, I don't know how to hand calculate for some of the techniques I'm most fond of. I'm not math savvy enough for advanced trigonometry, sadly. So I'm going to assume that I still have Starlight software and everything. And the first book that came to mind with this question is The Archetypal Universe by Renn Butler. I remember picking this up following a recommendation by Spencer Michaud, a book lover, if I ever saw one. He mentioned it during one of his live shows. And he said that he really loved this book as a reference for keywords and diving into the archetypal combinations of planets. And I was really intrigued. So I got it, and it really didn't disappoint because you have archetypal associations for each planet. Both the 7 traditional visible, but also Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And it goes into every single combination of them by duets and by triads. It's just so juicy to me. It's so good. You really get so much out of it. And I think it's a really neat book to have on hand when studying transits, writing horoscopes, trying to, get the astrological muscles going, so to speak. Yeah.
So what are some of the duads or triad interpretations that really resonate with you?
I was actually I was about to speak about Mars Jupiter because we have that right now.
Well, that's now. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And I have Mars Jupiter natally in a strong aspect. And for instance, he talks about positive, exuberant energies, wholesome physical confidence, a talent for good timing and synergy, and fortunate action. So those are the positive aspects of Mars Jupiter. And then he also gives the more difficult ones, which I really like. You have no sugarcoating. You have both the good and the bad. And so the more challenging things are impulses towards self-glorification and self-aggrandizement, an overly boisterous or rambunctious style, quite choice of words, a philosophy of might makes right, and big shot swagger. And then it really goes into it in much more detail. It's so interesting. You really get so much out of just that in terms of images that come up, maybe, people you're reminded of. And I find also that when you look your own planetary combinations, you're oh yeah, that is something I've, tried to work on not to embody, for instance.
Right. I've been projecting that on everyone else, but it's in my chart.
Yeah, it's good. It's good for introspection. It's good for just doing good old delineation on whatever you're working with. It's really neat. Yeah.
That's amazing. And, since there's so many combinations, it would be great if you're going to be in a deserted place for a while, just having to memorize them or just get familiar with all the images that come up.
Yeah, that's a book I think would be so useful to really know by heart. Good goals.
Well, I also like that it's not just duads, that there's actually another, there's 3 that come into play, because so often, you'll find that there are more than one, in this lunation. So we're recording this right now in August, but on August 19th, there's 2 different sky conversations with 3 planets each, right? We're getting a full moon square Uranus, and then we're getting Mars, Saturn, Jupiter involved in another tight square. So
yeah,
everybody's talking.
Yeah, it's really good. So in the triads, you have Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, because Saturn, Neptune, of course, happens in Pisces.
Yeah.
And it's really good. It talks about philosophical and spiritual maturity, practical idealism and compassion, a mystical glorification of balance and humility, an awareness of the positive sides of adversity and challenge. I find that when you doom spiral about a transit, it's a good book to have in hand to look at the more positive things. You're oh yeah, I thought about that. There's potential for that too. Because in the more challenging stuff, you have a feeling of deflated hopes and dreams. grandiose illusions and consequences, an emphasis on hollow rituals and dogmas in one's religious life, mundane busyness obscuring the depths of one's spiritual imprisonment. So fun times.
Yeah. Well, it's also spontaneous outbreaks of peace.
I like that.
If you think about the last time Saturn and Neptune conjoined, there was the end of the Korean War suddenly, and the end of apartheid and the Berlin Wall in the same week. So we could be seeing a ceasefire.
I would love that.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. What would your next book be?
My next book would be what is probably my most used at this point, Star and Planet Combinations by Bernadette Brady. So this one is really special to me. I also purchased it because a colleague mentioned it, actually.
Okay.
Noticing a pattern here now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was Oscar Moses Diaz who recommended it. I found Oscar's passion about the fixed stars just so enthralling and contagious, really. And I remember something just clicked for me, and I was like, oh, I really need to explore this thing further, and when I started to really study fixed stars with this book, it was like discovering astrology, anew, a second time. And they described Star and Planet Combination as a really good cookbook. And I think they're right on with that, because the delineations are really short, but to the point. And I mean, I feel like this book is underrated. Yeah, you can really get started with studying fixed stars with that and really do a lot.
It's very haiku-like. I find Bernadette's delineations to be quite like thought bombs or something, because it's very condensed, but then you unpack it. Maybe it's not a bomb. Maybe it's more like popcorn. You've got this kernel, and then it just pops out, and you're just like, ooh, so nutritious.
I like this image. Yeah, I feel like there are such good starting points as well. I was so nourished by this book when doing research. And when talking about it with clients in consultation, sometimes I would be like, okay, so, one of my teachers says this about this paran that you have. And I was like, okay, we'll just see what comes up. And they would be like, wow, that's so spot on. It's uncanny. And then would explain to me a story that was so literal. And we were both just stunned. And this happened again and again. So yeah, definitely the book I pick up the most when doing consultations. I really appreciate the rich research that you have a key to with this book, really.
Yeah. And she's also got that restoration of a relational component to the fixed star work. So instead of projecting onto the ecliptic, there's this paran relationship in the critical parts of the sky, which I think is why it hits so hard,
I agree. I have found a lot of research that I do sometimes is kind of led by hunches, which I think I would have loathed to admit when I first started, because I wanted to think that, I was doing things in a more rational way and stuff. And now I'm like, no, actually, my approach is pretty lunar. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, I am getting this vibe. I'm going to pursue this.
No, just blame your daimon. It's fine. It's not just a hunch. It's your daimon speaking loudly.
And so sometimes I will get, a hunch I don't know, listen to someone on a podcast or something like that, a celebrity or whoever, and be like, oh, they have such a strong, whichever star vibe. And then if you look at their chart with just the ecliptic, it's not there. But as soon as you pull up the paran, you're like, oh yeah, it's there. It's definitely there.
Wow.
And yeah, I love that.
That's like a really cool kind of bingo. I'd go for that game. Guess the fixed star on the paran here.
Oh, yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I think too, like with that kind of book that you have there, star and planet combinations, you can start to truly get to know the star and the planet, but it just takes a lot of charts, right? Like you just again and again, and slowly you're like, ooh, Saddleswood is a good star. Antares is hard, that kind of thing slowly becomes clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I tend to recommend this particular book to people who want to get deeper into fixed stars and parans instead of, the more classically recommended Brady's book of fixed stars, because I find that this one really gives you a lot to work with, to get really practical with research and getting to know the parans, which is so precious, because some delineations that she gives, you wouldn't get to by yourself just thinking about the combination of the star and the planet. And some of them I was like, where's this coming from? That's so peculiar. And then, I looked it up. Like I started researching. I was like, oh yes, he's absolutely right, actually.
Wow.
You don't get, you don't get her receipt. Like she doesn't give you lots of examples for each delineations, just one, but it is spot on. Yeah, I really like this book.
It's sort of awesome too if you look at the way that, if you put them in order of someone's chart of like, stars rising or the culminating or the setting, and then you get this sort of haiku of life. Like, oh yeah, the middle part of your life is going to be, Zosma's not exactly a star you want there, but, and then you get down to like, your legacy or your posthumous reality, and it's like, you'll be fine. You'll leave a good legacy or whoever, because I've done this with soldiers and stars, right? They have a very robust relationship, and you'll find that people who are ever in the military do have military stars in their chart.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty crazy to see that, where it's just like someone's just like, hey, I had a low draft number and ended up joining the military so that I wouldn't be in a bad position. And it's like, yep, you did your chart. You're doing your chart.
Yeah, totally. I do love this big like kind of arc of life where you have big chapters. It is really, really interesting to consider. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you handle it if someone comes to you and you see in like the last third of their life that all these horrible stars are around? Like, how do you navigate talking to someone about that?
It really depends on a lot of things. If someone came to me like really worried about these stars, because for instance, let's say they have like Algol and Antares and Fascius, at the end of their life, and everything they could find about these stars is like terrible, being eaten by rabbit dogs or whatever.
Oh my God. And then assassinated, but
Yeah. I mean, if they came to me really worried, of course, I would try to discuss this with them and see how the stars might have been already showing up for them, actually, because while these categories are really useful and you can see them play out definitely, there are stars in my setting parans. I'm not yet there, I'm not in my 60s, but they're still very, very loud already. So I expect that they will get louder in my 60s, but they're already there. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic beyond fixed stars, right? How to approach more challenging events in one's life, and how to help people and not put them in further anxiety or fear about the future.
Yeah. I had a client who had acumen angular, and that was hard to describe to them that, it's like, well, people are going to be not nice to you around talking about you behind your back or just being kind of gossipy. And she goes, thank goodness. That's what it is. Like, it was a relief. And I was like scared to say anything because I'm just like, I don't really want to tell someone they're going to have like a lifelong string of gossiping people following them. Yeah. But they had already experienced that. And it was like, oh, it's not me. It's the star. And I was like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a surprising response. I didn't know what to expect, but I was glad that it wasn't, I never want to talk to you again. How dare you tell me this? It was more like a confirmation of like, you're describing my reality. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that reality because I don't have that star angular in my own chart. But, it actually was a very impressive conversation.
Yeah, angular stars are so loud. Probably the loudest, in my opinion. Because like it's it's really a matter of minutes. They're rising, setting, anti-culminating, or culminating at the moment of birth. So it's really like the star saying very loudly hi.
Right. Yeah. Or it's like, if you think about the way that we come onto the planet, that star's like, okay, I'm going to push this soul here. We're going to pop that one down. Very cool. All right. So what would your third book be?
My third book would also be a fixed star book, and it's actually like a little bit of cheating because it's a set of 2 books.
Good for you.
It's Secrets of the Ancient Skies by Diana K. Rosenberg. So these books were also recommended by a colleague, Maya Rourke, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so I'm going to caution you against listening to any episodes of my podcast because you're going to have to add like 100 books to your shelf.
Yeah, I'm afraid I've already done that, but but I kind of put myself on a moratorium for new books right now because yeah.
Well, you just got this one. So Diana K. Rosenberg's Fixed Star Duet.
Yeah, it actually so Diana Rosenberg has died now, and she left behind a stock of these books. She studied the stars for a very, very long time. So this is like really her legacy, and it's major. And so it's her, close one who are selling the books now on eBay, but they won't ship outside of the US.
Oh, no.
So I had been longing after these books for a while, and finally it happened, and some friends managed to ship it to me, which I'm really, really grateful for. And it was just so moving to me to start reading these books because she really just poured herself into it, and it's so manifest that she worked so hard and she was so devoted to her work and so passionate about the constellations. And there is such humility as well in, how she introduces it. And it's just really struck my heart.
Yeah.
And made me even more enthusiastic about studying her work. Yeah.
Wow. And those are really big books.
They're huge. Yeah, it's 2 huge books. And that makes me so happy, actually, because so much to dig into and so much in terms of examples as well. She does give a lot of examples of nativities, but also mundane astrology examples.
Yeah. You'll end up learning about the history of the whole world, really. I mean, it's what happens, it seems, with astrology. It's so interdisciplinary. You end up getting the human personality and expressions of self, but then you end up getting things like disasters and world events and political situations and all of it.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. Well, if someone were going to be learning astrology from you, what book would you get them started with?
So the first one would probably be You Were Born for This by Shannon Nicholas. Because I feel like this is such an excellent entry point for someone curious about astrology, ready to, take it seriously, but with a need for practicality and for emotionally nourishing information and not just a lot of technique that seems super overwhelming. I feel like it really shows that Nicholas was taught by Dimitri George from a technical point of view with this, lovely bridging of ancient and modern. This book doesn't go into everything at all. It focuses on the sun, moon, and ascendant primarily. But I feel like you still get a lot out of it. I especially love the delineations of aspects from the other planets to the sun, moon, and ascendant. And there's something just very down to earth and profound about these delineations. And this book is clearly written to be empowering, encouraging, and nurturing. And I feel like it really works well. I've had really good feedback as well to people that I've recommended this to.
Did they keep going? Were they like, I got it, I'm in?
Yeah, they really loved it. I feel like perhaps I would especially recommend this one to water signs, there's an emphasis on, getting to know your chart and thinking about how it expresses in your life and how you feel about it. And yeah, I feel like it's probably great for water signs.
Yeah. Very cool. Any others?
Yeah. The second one would be On the Heavenly Spheres by Luis Avelar and Elena Ribeiro. It's a really wide-ranging book in its scope, very structured, which I really appreciate. And I think it can be really reassuring and grounding when you're coming into astrology and you're like, okay, hold on. So you have 12 signs and you have 12 houses, and then you have different systems for houses. And what is real? What am I going to do with all of this? Like it can be so much to take in. And yeah, I feel like if someone is looking to get really serious about learning astrology, which we generally dub traditional, that is an excellent textbook that gets into a lot of specifics. So it would be on my go-to list for beginners that are interested by that type of framework. And the other one is Astrology and the Authentic Self by Dimitri George. Really any book by Dimitri George, but especially this one, because it's such an excellent, thorough book with really practical advice for students who aspire to become consulting astrologers. She doesn't just get into, so how do you read a chart and the method that you can have so it's not overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And she also talks about how to approach things that come up with clients. And it's just really, really excellent advice.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking time to come on to Within Orb and share your book ideas and all of your wisdom and intelligence. And
thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.